What?
It's been acting up all service.
We'll have to upload it later.
Yep.
Okay.
You don't have to do that. It's live.
It's live. Okay.
All right, so this is a little different than we normally would do it, but I'm going to give you a little sermonette. Hold on, I got to pull the shirt down. I'm going to give you a little sermonette before we begin, and this is basically the why we're about ready to launch and why we are starting a marriage ministry. Church family, one of the clearest ways you can see the health of a church is by looking at the health of its marriages. Because marriage is not just a social arrangement, it is a spiritual covenant designed by God. From the very beginning in Genesis 2:24, we're told, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Marriage was God's idea. In anything God designs, the enemy desires to disrupt. One, because marriage reflects the gospel. In Ephesians 5, Paul tells us that marriage is a picture, a living illustration of Christ in the church. Husbands are called to love like Christ. Wives are called to respond like the church. Which means this: when marriages are strong, the gospel is visible. When marriages struggle, that picture becomes blurred. So this isn't just about helping couples get along better. This is about displaying Jesus more clearly in our homes. 2, because strong marriages build strong churches. Healthy churches are not built on programs. They're built on people. And people live in homes. If marriages are strained, disconnected, barely surviving, it will eventually show up in leadership, serving, discipleship, and marriage. But when marriages are growing, praying together, forgiving, fighting for unity, the entire church becomes stronger. Strong homes create strong churches because no one drifts into a healthy marriage. Let's be honest for a moment. No marriage becomes strong by accident. We drift towards busyness, miscommunication, frustration, distance. Healthy marriages require intentionality. They require learning, investing, sharpening, and sometimes healing. That's why we're starting this ministry. Not because marriages are failing, but because marriages are worth fighting for. Because we want to be a church that builds, not just maintains. We are not called to simply hold things together. We, as the church, are called to build, to strengthen what matters most. To come alongside couples and say, you're not alone. We're in this with you. And by God's grace, your best days are not behind you. So this is what the closing vision of this is. Imagine this with me. If marriages pray together, homes filled with peace instead of tension, children growing up seeing love molded, a church where unity starts at the dinner table. That's what we're praying for. That's what we're building towards. Because when God strengthens marriages, he strengthens everything. We're starting this marriage ministry because we believe that when God restores and strengthens marriages, he doesn't just change homes, he transforms generations. So, Natalie and I, we are up here. This isn't normal, I know, for people. Natalie is not a pastor. I have to say that because I know somebody from the SBC is probably going to see Natalie up here and report us as having a female pastor. But the thing is this. Natalie is up here. We are up here with nearly 30 years of marriage. I know we don't look that old, but we got married young. She was 19, I was 24. But we're up here with nearly 30 years of marriage, and we have seen good times and bad times. We have seen good times and bad times with our friends. And I think, like, if I were to say, we went through premarital counseling, something that, hold on. We went through premarital counseling for 16 weeks. I know a lot of people are going to look at that and say, why that much? And it was because the couple that married us, discipled us, mentored us, they were ready to celebrate their 25th anniversary, and they have gone through in 25 years a lot. He's a pastor, he planted a church, their youngest son has health issues, and they both have had health issues, and they recently celebrated their 54th year, and he is retired from ministry, but he has said that, and he is so glad that we are beginning this because we are doing exactly what Paul told Timothy, pass on what you have learned. Mm-hmm. And Natalie and I last year, we were at a conference that talked about biblical counseling and how churches have kind of gone and forgotten about that because they fear, we're going to get sued because they mistake biblical counseling for actual counseling like mental health counseling, and there needs to be a decision between the two. And within biblical counseling is marriage counseling. You don't need to have a degree to do that. We've got all we need here in the Bible. And we started to see what was going on. So I wish I had the slides here. I probably could get them going. But if we look right now, do you have anything? Before I continue, I'm going to ask. Do you? So Natalie is going to chime in at times. She's also going to speak from a wife's perspective. But we're going to talk about why we're starting this. So overall, the headline on divorce statistics, church versus secular, this is something we need to understand.
I might chime in with these.
Okay. The overall divorce rates in the U.S., roughly 30 to 31% of churches, of marriages end in divorce. Not the often quoted 50%. That's not a real number. To borrow from the president, it's fake news. But roughly 30 to 31% of marriages end in divorce. That's still too high. This is the baseline for the general population. When we look at Christians versus non-Christians, there's a broad comparison. Practicing Christians, those who go to church, 16% have been divorced. Non-Christians, 16% have been divorced. Then non-practicing Christians, those are people that say they're Christian. We'll get into that. There's a name for them. But they have 20%. The key takeaway here is, on the surface, Christians overall look very similar to the secular world.
That, to me, is a very discouraging statistic. That's a scary statistic because we're supposed to look different than the world. And it's because I feel that churches are not taking seriously the covenant that God created. The most important union that God created on the face of this earth is between a husband and a wife.
So if we look at this by religious affiliation, the divorce rates, evangelical Christians, 26% have been divorced. Catholics, 28%. That should shock you because Catholics probably are the ones where we know they don't like divorce, but 28% have been divorced. By comparison, non-Christians, it's 38%. So there's a little bit difference there. In religious groups, it's a moderately lower divorce rate, but not dramatically different overall. The critical distinction is this that we have to understand. The biggest mistake in discussions is this: Christians is not one category. We have to understand that there are two differences. There are cultural or nominal Christians. Those are the people that they grew up, America, Christian country, yes, I'm a Christian. These are the people. A couple of months ago, Natalie and I, we were visited by a pastor who's looking to have a mission team come up here to paint the church, and he said, you know, he's from the South, and he's like talking to the guy that's coming to paint the building at the church or do some kind of repair, and he would ask him, oh, are you a Christian? Yeah, I go to church. What church do you go to? You know, oh, the church over there. But he didn't ask him like deeper questions. He just assumed that he was a Christian. And then as he talked to him, he started realizing this guy hasn't been to church in like 4 or 5 years.
I think he actually asked who was the pastor at the church.
Yes.
And the guy could not even answer who the pastor at the church that he was attending. So it kind of it kind of made him sit there and say, not everyone who says I'm a Christian is really a Christian.
And Natalie and I are currently reading a good book on that called
The Unsaved Christian.
Yes.
It's really good.
And it talks about the cultural Christians. The other group that there is us, active Christians, those in church, those watching online that aren't here today. Those are the active Christians. Those are the people that are actively working out their faith. They're at Bible studies. They're parts of men's or women's groups. They're really trying to work out their faith and everything.
And also, I think there's spiritual fruit.
Yes.
That's being, you look at someone and you can say, that person's a believer, that person's a Christian, because you're actually seeing spiritual fruit in their lives.
So, those are the two groups. Practicing faith makes the major difference. This is the statistics we got to see. So, regular Christian attendance, up to 50% lower divorce rate. Strong shared faith, a 35% lower risk of divorce. And active churchgoers, those going to church, those active in ministries, different things really growing, 50% less likely to divorce. The contrast is this: nominal Christians are actually more likely to divorce than the general population. So, this brings us to marriage trends, secular versus the church. Christian and marriage stability. Christians are more likely to be married overall, even if remarried. 58% of divorced Christians remarry. This creates the illusion that divorce is high because more Christians marry, more remarry, so divorce experiences appear more common. In other words, and I know this, if I were to survey the church, here and those who are not here today, I know that there are more people who have been divorced and remarried. And this isn't saying anything bad here about that. It's just, this is what the statistics are showing, because there is that number. The way that they do stats, they cherry pick stats at times. They could sit there and say, see, this church has blank amount of people who have been divorced, so the divorce rate is high among Christians. And it's not. That's why you have to have scientific data to really pull the numbers. So, the cultural shifts affecting everyone. Now, this is an interesting thing. 81% of Gen Z still value marriage. So Gen Z is the youngest generation that is graduating high school right now. They are in college, they are developing, but they've also redefined it. Nearly 70% of non-religious people say divorce should be easier. That's a scary stat. The culture is becoming more individualistic and more flexible about marriage permanence, meaning how long you stay married. Major marital issues or marriage issues in the church and secular world. These problems show up in both groups, but often differently. So think about this. What I'm going to say, there's a difference between the way the world views it and the way the church views it. The shared issues: communication breakdown, financial stress, infidelity, sexual dissatisfaction, parenting conflicts. These are consistently cited across marriage research, and you figure this, communication breakdown. Watch the news. You see the Hollywood whenever, these two stars, they are signed up for divorce. Why? Because communication breakdown. Not the Led Zeppelin song. It's a communication breakdown. Doesn't sound like a worthy thing to have a divorce about. Financial stress. Oh, it would be better if we were single.
And that is one of the most highest reasons why couples divorce, because of that.
Yep. Infidelity, the church values loyalty, the sacredness of marriage, the sacredness of the vows. The secular world doesn't matter. So these are the things that we look at. Issues more visible in the church. Nominal faith, belief without practice. That's scary. That's people that say they're Christian, but
not spiritual fruit.
Yeah, their worldview is supposed to be Christianity, but their worldview looks more like the outside than inside the church. There's a lack of ongoing discipleship in marriage. That's why we're starting this ministry. Shame preventing couples from seeking help early. A lot of people don't want to admit that they're having marriage issues, so they hide it.
Or they wait until they're in crisis mode, and then they go to the pastor and say, hey, we need counseling, when it should have been a while ago,
And we've seen that. We've seen that recently. If you've been here at the church, we've had somebody who recently went through that. And when I talked with the husband, and he's given me permission to share this, he said it. If he wanted to go and do marriage counseling, but she didn't. And that's kind of, what's there. It's a stressor, it's a struggle, it's something that we need to kind of not make it sound like if you're coming to a church to do marriage counseling or to do marriage ministry, marriage discipleship, it's not a shame, it's preventive maintenance. If we're honest, who here takes their car or does their oil change every 3,000 to 5,000 miles,
Right.
You do preventive maintenance so something can keep going and keep working, and that's what we need to do with marriages. So,
The last one.
yeah, overemphasis on premarital counseling, little follow-up. So, everybody talks about premarital counseling. Like I said, Natalie and I did 16 weeks. Premarital counseling, I've talked to so many pastors, and I'm going to be transparent here. I get upset because I hear the pastors say, well, all I'm going to do is just 1 hour with them, talk about budget, talk about kids, talk about, who's going to do the cooking and who's going to be the breadwinner.
Also, my mom, the lady that she was a pastor's wife, and her and her husband were in ministry for many, many years. Her husband ended up dying of cancer, and she ended up meeting another pastor. And this individual went to California with this man, engaged to be married to him, another pastor. And like me and my mom were talking, and she went to this lady who was older, because she had been down that path, she had already done ministry, and my mom said, I really think you should do some marriage counseling. Oh no, I've been down that road, I don't need it, I'm in my 60s, why do I need to do marriage counseling? And he deserted her. He went down to California and he deserted her, so it doesn't matter how long a person's been married, it doesn't matter how their age. It's important for premarital counseling. It's something that's serious. It's something that, in a little while, I'm going to share a little bit about our story, but it's so important to discuss those issues, because if we have baggage before our marriage, whether we've been married before, or we're not married, or we've been through trauma, or whatever, we're going to carry that into the marriage that we are going into.
So, some of the issues, let me say this. I think I can say this now. Like we talked about, there's the difference in when people are talking. Not that Natalie and I have nominal faith, but Natalie and I have talked about this. There are different theological beliefs that we have. Both are biblical, I will say that, but it's because of the way Natalie was raised and the way I was raised, what we learned and what we've carried forward. Granted, we've changed, you grow in your faith, but there's a couple of things that Natalie and we could get into a
touch
debate.
a little bit about that too.
Yeah, we could get into a huge debate about, but that is the thing that, for us, is it worth our marriage to argue over theological differences? No. We know that, if we look at the Bible, there's scripture that backs her up, scripture that backs me up, and we just choose to work it out together because our marriage is more important. There's going to be that thing. Paul and Peter disagreed on things.
Mm-hmm.
There's that type of thing that is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the thing that ends a marriage. And
Right.
that's what you have to understand, is working out your differences.
Right.
All right. So within marriage, there is the secular view. There's a lower commitment to lifelong marriage. We think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, just look at Hollywood. Look at how many times actors and actresses have been married. There's a higher acceptance for divorce as a solution. And there's delayed or avoided marriage. I can think of one Hollywood couple that Natalie and I have watched, and I think they've been together for over 40 years and still not married. And that's where cohabitation replaces marriage. So the big insight is this. Here's the most and honest data that we have that has backed this conclusion. The church does not automatically produce stronger marriages. A lot of people think the church will produce stronger marriages. But what does is active, lived out faith is what lives out, what causes stronger marriages. So you look at it, cultural Christianity, there's no measurable benefit. You can say you're a Christian, you can go to all the Christian movies and do everything and act, but if you're not actively growing in your faith, trying to study and grow in your faith, you're not going to have the possibility of a stronger marriage. The practice Christianity, strong protective effect. So the statement, Christians divorce at the same rate as the world, is misleading. The truth is more nuanced. Nominal Christians are equal to the world or worse, if we're honest, and committed Christians still have less than the world and significantly lower, but still too much, depending on the needs there. And what I mean is, there are a couple of things where we would say the divorce is allowed,
Yeah.
like abusive situations
Right.
and different things like that.
Yep.
So,
All right, so I want to share a little bit about our story. Some of you might know, this is going to be brief, but I think it's important to be transparent. We're not sitting up here saying we have all the answers. We do not have a perfect marriage, but we're learning. It's a process, it's a journey. So I was 16 when I met Don, and he was 22, and we started dating. We probably dated close to 3 years, and we both came from Christian backgrounds, grew up in the church. You had backslid a little bit, like you were kind of...
I got into the military and I just said, church, don't need it anymore.
And that's coming from someone who was a PK, whose father pastor, grandfather pastor. So I had dated other guys and, but, I was still young. I was only 16. And then a mutual friend introduced us who was not a Christian, but God used him to bring us together.
You said, I have the perfect girl for you. The only problem is she's a Christian.
And we were like, okay, so we started dating. And he started coming to church with me, and we eventually got into ministry. But before that, he had proposed to me when I was young, and my father's like, well, when you turn 18, if you still feel that way, then I'll consider giving my blessing. So then when we finally had agreed that we wanted to take this seriously and everything, we sat down with our mentors, Pastor Jeff and Laura Jeffers. Some of you have met them. They've been here occasionally.
We affectionately call them
Papa Jeff and Mama Laura. And they, he said, when I tie a knot, it's not going to come undone. And he said, we're not saying that 16 weeks is the ideal or it has to be that amount, but a lot of churches, most churches, take premarital counseling as a joke. It's not taken seriously. So we prayed, and it was tough because we were young. And I remember at one point I looked at Don and I said, as Jeff and Laura are laying out the curriculum and what we're going to be discussing, I looked at him and I said, I don't want to do this. Let's just go elope.
Yes, we were
I'm like, let's just go elope. And I think we actually considered it a little bit. Like, we were like, this is tough, But then as I sat down and we prayed together, we realized that they weren't trying to be difficult. They were trying to be serious, to walk us through all the issues. We were young. I was dealing with some depression, some mental health issues. He had lived on his own. I had not. There were just so many different things. Spiritually, we were on the same level for the most part. But as far as maturity, I still was young. I had a lot of maturity. And then came up the issue of, you wanted to be a pastor. Well, I kicked and screamed. I did not want to be a pastor's wife. I said, I love him, but I don't know if I want that calling. I don't know if I want that call. Lord, what are you doing? You've got to be kidding. And he's like, well, he goes, this is what I want to do. So if you want to marry me, that's what we're going to have to do. So we went through the 16 weeks of premarital counseling, and it was tough, but it was well worth it.
One of the things that Jeff and Laura had us do in that time was to write a top 10. What is the top 10 things in our lives that we both...
The priorities.
And the thing was, as he said, the top and the bottom matched, but the middle was like all over the place. And he said it might sound like he's like, I could say yes, but we need to make sure that, you guys know how to work things out. And he asked me at the time, he said, are you willing to step aside from ministry until Natalie's ready to go into ministry? And I said yes, because I loved her and because we were working things out, and even though I was already ordained and everything else, it was one of these things. So we ended up getting married in September of '98, and I was taking like a little role at the church at the time, and she fought tooth and nail, even me doing that. But then, by the grace of God, after she had some medical help and everything.
Hold on, let's back up a little bit. That first year of marriage was very tough.
Yes.
It's only by God's grace and what our mentors put us through. Marriage boot camp is what they called it. And by what my parents had taught me when I was young and seeing the example of his parents that kept us together. I was dealing with mental health. I had close to 9 hospitalizations that first year. I was dealing with my rape from when I was younger that I had not even dealt with until that first year of marriage. And then we also lost our daughter that first year of marriage. So all of that happened within the first year. The first year,
first year and then some.
I probably was spent more time in the hospital that first year than I did with him. Like, it was just, and, it's only by God's grace that he got us through that year. It's only by God's grace that he got us through that year that we were able to come out. So the reason why I'm sharing that, one, to be transparent, but to show you that that's why, if it's trauma, if it's things we've gone through, I was sharing with the ladies on Thursday at the women's Bible study. We were talking about Tamar and how what she went through being raped by one of David's sons. And I was sharing with them how when you go as a woman, when you go through trauma and you have trusted men and you've been hurt, and then you go into the marriage bed and you're sitting there and a godly man comes into your life, sometimes it's even hard to see that because you push that away because you're so hurt by but God used him, and he was patient, he was loving, he was understanding, and it just brought us through everything with that. And we've gone through a lot since then, a lot of different health issues, but God brought us through it all.
And that's...
the other thing, too, that I wanted to share was, and it was kind of like an emotional thing. So Dawn's mom was a prayer warrior. And she was like my second mom. Like, she didn't say, oh, you're my daughter-in-law. She said, you're my daughter. I had a special relationship with her. When she passed, it was very, very tough for me, very tough. But Dawn can attest that she was such a godly woman, a godly woman that had God's anointing on her. So on the first 1-year wedding anniversary, September 12th, 1999, she wrote me a letter. And I still have the letter to this day, and I actually was looking at it yesterday, and I said to Dawn, I have to share this. And she wrote, 1999, so before this, she wrote, one day you and Dawn are going to share with other married couples what you've been through, and God's going to use you in a mighty way. And I was just like, yeah, like I didn't believe it then. I was like, yeah, right, because I was going through so much turmoil in my mind and my heart, and being a newlywed and being so young, I didn't see that. And then years later, I look back and I'm like, wow. Like, I think she knew. I think God revealed something to her that we didn't know at the time.